So today I watched a video by TheMessianicManic, link in the description box. It's called Why I'm an Atheist. And it was a bit different than the videos I've made over the years explaining why I myself am an atheist. I'll put some links to those too. Most of my videos were in relation to the whole what is the definition of atheism kind of conversation that happens here on YouTube. And me trying to point out that there are different ways to come to the position of atheism and that it's important. It really is. Not so much as far as what we're all going to vote against when we're in the extreme minority. But it's important when you're trying to understand a person. So, when I say that I'm an atheist to people at some sort of secular convention or conference or meeting or gathering or the secular Sundays brunch that we have at Panera's in my town, it's strange to them because I've worked with people from RDF. I've worn atheist out campaign A's like a patch on my arm, right? I've done that. I have passed out all sorts of evolved fish, you know. I've done so much activism in the name of the atheist movement, as it were, and people are like, wait, you don't identify yourself as an atheist? And the answer to that is I do, because other people understand me that way. It's all about the context, you see, because at my core I feel like skepticism is the way that I came to my beliefs, right? Or my ideas about the world. I don't even like the word belief. But the things that I accept as true in the world, I kind of use skepticism to get there. And coming from that perspective, I'm a bit different than somebody who just happened to be an atheist. Like, they weren't indoctrinated into anything else. They just didn't have to do any introspection or soul searching. You know, they just were brought up that way, you know. I'm a bit different because the reasons that I have for being that way are different. And that's not the only type of atheist that would be different than me. There are people who have very dumb reasons to have the same conclusion as me, as far as the question of whether or not you believe in a deity. So I'd say around 2004, I was in a classroom at University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee, and we had a bunch of people who were also taking classes in Chicago. And there was this big movement down in Chicago with people saying we should spread atheism, this as an idea. And so they brought it up to this classroom on spiritual writing that I was in. And that was the first time I had encountered it. And still, I didn't fully understand the concept. But the way that I understand the concept now, years later, is it's kind of like the order of operations in mathematics. To me, it's important to do all the multiplication and division before you do the subtraction and the addition. Because if you don't, you will come up with the wrong answer in a very large equation. So, for instance, real world applications, you could set out to build a house And if you did the addition and subtraction before you did the multiplication and division, you could end up with not enough wood to build the house, or too much wood, depending on how your messed up math went. And for me, the question of what does the term God mean is what you have to answer first before you can decide whether or not you believe in a God or gods. And I can understand why some people think that atheism sounds like just a restating of agnosticism. But agnosticism versus Gnosticism and theism versus atheism being about knowledge or belief. Atheism is much like agnosticism applied to the question of are you going to believe? And there are many out there who think that you should be considered an atheist if you're an atheist, right? They think if you're not a theist, you must be an atheist. It's a dichotomy. It's perfect that way. But from my point of view, it just does not logically follow. It seems like you're doing the order of operations wrong. And for me, the proof is in the pudding. Just like a house that you set out to build and you have either too little or too much wood because you did the calculations wrong. I feel like if you don't start with answering the question, what do we mean when we say God? And we don't postpone answering the question, then we're answering that question first, right? And so you would include a whole bunch of people who otherwise would not be on your side, or would not be in the Venn diagram that you're drawing. You are pigeonholing people into a position that later on, when they actually talk about, well, what does God mean? They find out that they don't stand with you on most anything else. For example, should a binary dunce hold an atheist convention, where an entire Seattle based Staples Center was filled with all atheists, and they had to pay, say, $50 to get in, and then there were going to be all these powerful atheist speakers, and they were going to have an agenda where they were all going to leave there and go to a ballot box, and they were going to vote against something. Among those atheists that show up to such an event, how many of them are apatheists, pantheists, panentheists, Buddhists, Taoists, the Nez Perce Indians from around that region? How many of them are atheists that don't identify as atheists? Those atheists that you would include if you had this perfect dichotomy. How many of them are there that would go to that event? How many of them are there that would stand with you if you were to, say, want to stamp out religion because all religion is bad? If you are going to start with the thought that all of these Buddhists and Taoists are atheists, then, when you try to bring this group together around an issue, you're going to have problems because they don't think the same way as you. There is a difference between the way that they came to their atheism or their lack of belief, and the way that you came to it. So, in beginning with the question, what is God? I feel like my world just logically makes sense. Because if I started with the question, do I believe in a God? Logically, I see a lot of anti-theism that would follow from starting the order of operations that way. I see a lot of hatred and bigotry being brought into the world by those people who think that the order of operations should be that, and that all igtheists are actually just a subclassification of atheist. Whereas, from my perspective, igtheists and Buddhists and Taoists and panentheists and all those other types of people that don't necessarily fit the atheist or theist dichotomy, they actually prove that that dichotomy is not a useful concept when you're applying it to real world situations. And so for me, the proof is in the pudding. As an igtheist, I feel like I'm coming to reality with a model that fits reality. And I know how much wood it takes to build a house. And I know what kind of people are going to show up for an event that I throw. And I accept the term atheist as a selective Gnostic. Because I'm not a pure agnostic. I will say that most people are not purely agnostic about everything. If it is a God that you have explored and you have decided that logically this God could not exist in the description that you are given, which the TheMessianicManic went over, with the problem of evil with Epicurus and all the different permutations that come from that. You can be selectively Gnostic and say, okay, I don't know, if there's a God out there that might actually have a definition that works. But this God here, I have explored that one, right? And in that, if I go down the street here in Colorado Springs to focus on the family, and they ask me if I have asked Jesus into my heart, and I say, no, I don't believe, they're going to call me an atheist. And I'm going to understand what they mean. Because in that context, I know that they're talking about the God of the Bible, Yahweh Almighty, right? And just about any way you spin the Bible, I've come up with logical problems such that I can't believe that the God of the Bible exists. So they might be a little bit different in their belief than the other person. Like the first shift person at the call center at Focus on the Family, at their front desk, they might believe a little bit differently than the second shift person. But I'm pretty sure that if we're dealing with the God of the Bible, I don't believe. And in that way, I feel like we've already decided in that context what we mean by what is God. So that's why I feel comfortable when people label me as an atheist, rather than dig a little bit further and find out what I actually think about the world. It's because in the context that they are most familiar with, and they just assume everybody else accepts, I would be an atheist. So I feel it's important to look a little bit deeper into the ways that people come to their atheism. and not just assume that if you meet another atheist, oh, you must have been smacked on the hand with a ruler by the nuns too, you know? People come to that conclusion for all sorts of different reasons, and some of which you wouldn't even respect as much as hearing the Messianic-Manic explaining his rationale. But, you know, I'm not saying that we can't come together for a common goal. We just have to understand that we're not all here for the same reasons. You know, it's not even right to assume that every atheist is going to be a liberal or a Democrat or a libertarian. You know, there's all sorts of atheists out there with all sorts of beliefs, and I think that trying to group people together to further a cause, you might be better off, especially with the numbers the way they are in the United States, working together with a coalition of people that maybe don't agree with you on whether or not there's a God, but maybe agree with you on, you know, what's the right thing to do. That's my 2 cents on it. Maybe a little bit less uploads for the rest of the week, but I'll come back strong mid-month.